Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. It's really good to see you all. Thank you for joining us today for our final session in the Rose Foundation's 2022 Grassroots Grantee Convening. My name is Aurora Heying, and I'm the Program Officer for our Grassroots Funds here at the Rose Foundation. This is the last in our four-part series on fundraising strategies for grassroots groups. And today we're going to talk about how to run a community appeal for donations. If you missed an earlier session or want to share these trainings with others in your network, please check out the recordings and slides from our previous sessions. We'll post those to our website and we'll share the link in the chat here. And we'll also email it out next week once we have this session's recording up and ready to go. And then, because it's our last session, I just want to take a minute to thank our fabulous interpreters, Marcy, Claudia, and Isidra with Calliope and Clio Collaborative. They've done an amazing job helping to make these trainings accessible to Spanish speakers. And I also want to offer just a huge thank you to Leah and the team at Nonprofit Learning Lab for their wonderful facilitation and trainings. It's really been a pleasure to be in this space with all of you. Thank you. Leah, I'll hand it off to you for today's session.
All right, thank you so much, Aurora, and thank you everyone for joining on a Friday afternoon. Very appreciative of seeing all your faces. So a few reminders of how we learn together is feel free to ask questions, all right? If you ever have a question, ask it. You can ask it in the Zoom group chat. If you have a question, likely somebody else has a question. And every question is an important question, so please ask. You're going to get the recordings and the handouts, so don't worry about that. Should you need any tech support, ask and mention in the chat so that we are aware. We are going to go in breakout rooms, and this is an opportunity to reflect and process and ideate. And one thing to remember as we go through strategies today and we talk about creating community appeals and campaigns is that you have to go do this work, right? And you have to do this work with your colleagues or with your volunteers and within committees. And some of these strategies you might have to adapt for your own organization, right? So that they are authentic to your organization and authentic to your approach. So that's really important. I'm going to go through lots of different methods and strategies, and you always should be thinking, how might we tweak this? How might we do this for ourselves? And that's also why we go into breakout rooms so that you can plan and think for the future. So what we are going to cover today is we're going to discuss different types of community appeals and potential avenues to raise funds from community members. And typically when we think of community appeals, it's year-end community appeals. So it might be participating in your state's Giving Tuesday, or doing a community appeal via email, or doing a direct mail community appeal, all right? Or maybe peer-to-peer fundraising. So we'll talk about different community appeals and sample timelines, okay? Because all of these things take work and they take more than a week to plan, all right? So we'll give you sample timelines and checklist so that if you want to do this, you have a realistic, oh, this is how long it might take to launch an appeal. And then always be thinking about how your campaign connects to your overall fundraising strategy. So in the first session, we talked about creating a fundraising plan, and you know, it takes time to figure out what you're going to put in the plan. And over the 4 sessions, hopefully you're landing on where you want to go with your plan in 2023. All right. I knew that you are not going to have a plan done at the first session, right? All of the ideas that we talk about in these 4 sessions make up your fundraising plan. And then you have to be thinking about how your committees, how your volunteers, how your staffing structure fits into the plan. and some reflection on where you want to go with what we've talked about over the last 4 sessions and thinking about 2023. So even if you weren't in all 4 sessions, it doesn't matter. You can still plan for 2023. All right, because it's coming up in 2 months, no matter what you think. All right. So types of community appeals. All right. So when we hear community appeal, we are ultimately asking our community members for donations, right? We are doing fundraising. We are appealing to our community. And these are different methods that we can use, okay? In the past sessions, we've talked about phone banking and why it's important, why picking up the phone is really important, all right? And monthly donors, we talked about that in the first or second session. So today we're more going to be talking about direct mail, which is the letters in the mail, right? Or email campaigns and the difference between the two. And your year-end campaigns, those are fundraising campaigns, okay? So these are all fundraising campaigns. And then we are also going to focus a little bit on peer-to-peer. So peer-to-peer fundraising is typically what you might see on social media on Giving Tuesday, where everybody is asking for donations on the same day, maybe via Facebook, right? So that is what we think of nowadays when you hear the word peer-to-peer. So I want to say that peer-to-peer fundraising is the oldest form of fundraising that exists. It's just people asking people for donations for their organization. Now there happens to be the social media attached to it, which is why it's far greater in organizations and more organizations are doing it. So community appeals, direct mail versus email. So if you're planning for a year-end campaign, you might be thinking about a community appeal. All right. And community appeals are basically asking for donations and support from the community. It might be donors. It might be volunteers. It might be community leaders. It might be community members, right? It's who's ever in your list, right? In your email list or whose ever address, physical address you have, okay? And you can do your community appeals via email, right? That's when you're asking for a donation via email with a link to donate. Hopefully the link works. We'll talk about that. And then it's also direct mail, literally where you send a letter in the mail with a returned envelope asking for donations. And we'll talk about some best practices related to that as well. So the details. Well, email is cheaper than direct mail, right? Because with direct mail, you often have to print out a letter, get an envelope and a stamp. And so it can be more expensive than email. All right. So also things to think about, the details, right, is that direct mail response rate can be anywhere from 5 to 9%. And the email response rate for donations, and this is average, the sources on the last slide, is anywhere from 1 to 2%. And it works. So they both work. And for you to make the decision of what you should do, you have to think about what data do we have? Data meaning email addresses or physical addresses. So you want to be thinking about that. Which data do you have best data for? Is it emails or is it physical addresses? And then what makes sense for your capacity and resources? Do you have time to send letters in the mail, stuff the envelopes, do the stamps? Do you have time for all that, right? And so you really need to be thinking about what makes sense for your organization and for your capacity. Sometimes for grassroots organizations, you see a blend of the two. So you might see an organization do an email campaign, right? And say, okay, we know we have good data for 100 people, all right? And we know that we have some volunteers, who can stuff envelopes, stamp envelopes, and we have the finances to do 100. So you might see a blend, right? You're likely gonna do both, maybe, all right? And ultimately, it's your organization that needs to decide, and I'm gonna give you sort of details and data and how to do it better, all right? So email. So things to be thinking about is, does your audience respond to email, right? So do you use an email provider such as MailChimp or Constant Contact? Okay, so when we talk about an email service provider, that's what we're talking about. We want to get away from sending community appeals from your Gmail account, but we really want to use a email service provider. That means you will not get stuck in spam. Okay, so in terms of email marketing, do you use an email subscription service to communicate with your volunteers and donors? And what's your open rate? Do you check your open rate for your email? So email is more affordable than direct mail, but you also need to be using an email subscription service so that you don't get marked as spam, because through Gmail or any of those accounts, if you send a BCC to more than 100 people, you'll probably be marked as spam and blocked out of being able to send email. So you need email addresses of your constituents, whether it's donors and volunteers or your partners. We talked last time about, if you do a pop-up event, how you might be able to get email addresses, right? We talked about maybe even using a QR code at a pop-up event. These are some strategies to grow your email list. Now, if you want to do a community appeal in the next few weeks, right, before the end of the year, you might still be able to use some of these strategies. You might be able to incorporate one or two of these strategies to grow your list, okay? So I don't want you to think that you can't do any of this. You could incorporate some of these things right now. So strategies to grow your email list is via your website, literally asking people for their email, doing a pop-up on your website where you ask people for their email address. You could also do this on whatever social media account you use that's most active. You could ask people for their emails that way. You can also do this at events through advocacy campaigns, right? If you use a system where you're asking people to send letters or advocate on behalf of your organization, you usually collect emails, all right? So these are ways to be thinking about how you can grow your email list to then do a email campaign. Other ways is through collaborative events where people sign up to register, across promotional, right? So maybe you have a collaborative with another organization and they promote what you're doing and they go to your website and maybe you have a pop-up on your website. Another thing to be thinking about is if you do a cross collaboration, you can have a link where it's sign up for our emails, blogging, resources, right? These are all ways that people grow their email list. These are examples of email service providers. So I'd love to know what people use. So yeah, we're going to talk about the unsubscription. So unsubscribe is okay. Okay, to be clear, it is okay if somebody unsubscribes from your email. So the average, I do a whole training on email, so I'm not going to go too into the weeds about unsubscribes, but I think the typical unsubscribe rate is like 1 to 3% in the nonprofit sector. So it's normal. Don't get worried about it. Now, what isn't okay is if you're sending an email every single day asking for donations, right? And you're getting a lot of unsubscribes. That's why we segment, right? So if you have a donor, right, that you're working with, you might want to segment them out of getting a fundraising email. Just like we talked about last time, if you're doing a phone banking and you're working with a donor to donate $500, you're not going to have a volunteer call them and ask them for $10. No, right? So just like, you know, you would treat a donor who's maybe going to donate $500, you wouldn't treat them in the same way as a monthly donor who you might be calling for the first time. You want to segment out email, okay? So you can segment in MailChimp, in Every Action, in Action Network, in Constant Contact, okay? And if you know somebody's donating, or if you know that somebody's just volunteering, tag them as a volunteer, and then they might not unsubscribe, okay? So segmentation is the best way to reduce unsubscribes, okay? So that means you need to know who's in your email list and how they got there, and there needs to be tags. And tags are who your community is, right? So it's a volunteer, it's a committee member, it's a monthly donor, it's a mid-level donor, it's a major donor. Everybody shouldn't be getting the same communication. The more you target and segment, the more likely you will reduce your unsubscribe. So hopefully I answered that question. All right, so other things to be thinking about are, all right, good, you feel better about fundraising. Okay, so other things to be thinking about, I would love to know how many times per month do you send an email through your email service provider, okay? And when I say email service provider, I mean Constant Contact, MailChimp, Every Action, Action Network. I mean not through Outlook or Gmail, okay? Because you will get marked as spam, all right? You will not be able to send messages, just the regular messages that you send to your volunteers. All right, I'm gonna close the poll and share where you all are at. All right. And it looks like the majority of you are doing 1 to 4. So you should not be worried about an unsubscribe if you're only sending 1 to 4. If you were sending 12 or more, I would say you should be worried about that. But it's just normal. It's normal attrition. If you think about how many times you unsubscribe from emails, right? It's just normal. Don't feel bad about unsubscribes, especially given that you all are sending 1 through 4. Okay, so how to improve open rates. So this is actually really important. If you're doing a year-end campaign, you want to improve the open rates because you want people to open the email, all right? So years ago, I worked for a grassroots literary organization, and they would do year-end campaigns. And when they wanted people to open their emails, who sent those emails? Famous writers that were on their boards, right? People that the community cared about. So if there's someone who's connected, and you could do this now, like you could start planning for this now, even though it's November 4th, okay? If there's people that your community really cares about, and they're willing to send an email on behalf and use their name on behalf of your organization, you could ask them to do that for you for your year-end campaign. It has to be someone that people care about, right? And connected to your mission. And you can't do it every month because then it gets old and it doesn't sort of have the cachet anymore. All right. So other things to be thinking about to increase open rates is subject line. So 90 characters or less. All right. Segment. We talked about segmentation. Also testing the send day, send time, and frequency. So if the people that you're emailing are volunteers and donors, right? During the day, they're probably working and they might not be checking their personal email. So if what you have is personal emails, you have to think about when people open their personal email. If what you have is work email, and you have most people's work email, they're opening work email maybe during the workday, but people open their email all the time. But you want to be thinking about what type of email addresses you have. All right. And be realistic about your open rate. So the average open rate is 20%. Okay, so if you know your open rate, share it in the Zoom group chat. Usually you can see it in every single report, every action, MailChimp, Constant Contact, they all share, they all share open rates. Okay, so a lot of this data is from M&R and Campaign Monitor. All right. And if people know the open rates of their emails, I would love for you to share that in the Zoom group chat. Oh, good point. So the way it works is if you get an email from, so if you get an email from somebody through Constant Contact, there's a name of a sender. And so you would put that person's name in the name of the sender. You would still use your organization's email account, but you would put their name in the sender. And so it would have to be a name people recognized. If they don't recognize it, it's not going to work, right? So if there's someone famous who people know that cares about your mission and they're connected to your organization, that's when it works. All right. So for this literary organization, people knew some of these, right? They knew the writers, right? And they knew that this happened. And then it becomes sometimes this email that people look forward to. Oh, it's a letter from so-and-so, right? And it becomes this thing that people actually read because this person is writing to them or to your community, right? And of course, there's going to be a link to donate, of course. All right, there should be at the end of the year. So things to also be thinking about when you have 0 to 5,000 subscribers, that's the number of people that you have in your email database. So if people know this number, share in the Zoom group chat. If you know how many people are in your email subscription database. So example, our organization has 100,000 people in our email database. All right. So 280. Okay, so this is great. So Mary has 280 people in their email database. If you have under 1,000, you can likely get MailChimp for free. I think they were bought out. So I think you have to have under 1,000, but Constant Contact and MailChimp give less than certain number of subscribers. They give this to you for free. So you can get the service for free. But things to be thinking about, right, is you grow your email list, and it's okay to grow your email list, to be clear, it's okay. All right, you want more email subscribers. It's volunteers finding out about your organization. It's people donating. Getting over the free bump is okay. All right, people worry about that sometimes. So other things to be thinking about is you want to find the right platform, all right, that works for you, one that you can segment. If you do a lot of advocacy, Action Network and Every Action work well for that, okay? Don't worry about going past the free version. If you're doing a lot in the next few weeks to grow your list, you might go past the free version, but those are all donors and potential volunteers, and you need donors to reach your goals, right? And to grow your organization, okay? So you want to be thinking about that. And it's important to find the right platform. Just because one organization might use Action Network or Every Action because they do advocacy campaigns, right? But if you don't do advocacy campaigns, it might not make sense for you to do that. It might make sense for you to use MailChimp or Constant Contact. So it's just some things to be thinking about. And it doesn't look like anybody's there at the moment, but when you get above 5,000 to 25,000, you want to make sure that you're using the right platform because it can be really hard to switch. All right, so there is somebody here. So Natural History Museum. So they're an organization that has 110,000 subscribers. It would be very hard for their organization to switch platforms. And it takes a lot of effort and time because when you switch, sometimes the platforms make you validate all your subscribers. So when you are around 5,000, you want to start to make sure that you're tracking what's working and that you really have the right platform. Okay, so for those of you who are lower, you want to make sure what you're using is the right thing. All right. So then, right, we're thinking about, using email as a tool to raise money. And we're thinking about email as a tool to do a year-end campaign. Okay. So I think sometimes it can be helpful to think about why you're sending out email. What are your themes? Okay. So sometimes it can be helpful to share impact and just thank people before you ask them for a donation, right? It can be helpful to highlight your programs and services so people know what you're doing before you ask them for an email or for a donation through email. So these are some ways in which you might want to plan out your emails before you ask for donations, right? And I do realize that it's November 4th. So, things to be thinking about if you're participating, and you can let me know when you're Giving Tuesday. I know every state has a different day of Giving Tuesday, so it's not necessarily on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. So if you have one that you're participating in December, you throw the date out in the Zoom group chat, because one thing to think about, it might be helpful to do an impact day or a highlight what we've accomplished in 2022, email before you ask for donations, right? So that people can see, oh, this is all the work that this organization has done, and this is what they plan on doing in 2023. And then you send out an email asking for a donation, because people will have gotten a sense of your accomplishments. Are you going to be able to do all of these emails before you ask for money? No, not at all. But if you were planning for 2023 and you were planning out your entire calendar year and you were putting themes in for your fundraising plan, you might be able to do all of these in 2023. All right. So that's things to be thinking about for in the next 2 months and in 2023. These are some other samples or themes. These are things to be thinking about if you're planning for 2023 and simultaneously planning for your year-end campaigns, community appeals in the next 2 months. All right. Other things to be thinking about when you're doing an email campaign and a community appeal is be personal. Okay. You want to talk to the folks that are your volunteers, that are your clients, that are your community, that are your donors, that are your alumni. And you want to let them know exciting things that are happening and explain what you want from them. All right. You always want to make sure that you have a call to action. A call to action is a link to donate, is something to do. If you're sending out an email, there should be something to do in it. Okay. Not too many things, not 20 things. All right. But 1 or 2 or 3 things. Okay. Also, really important is to avoid jargon, which is internal dialogue or phrases that your organization might use that you use, but maybe your volunteers don't understand. Okay. You want to try and keep emails short and to the point. Okay. So, because oftentimes if it's a person, if you're sending emails to somebody's personal email account, they're looking at it on a phone, and maybe they're looking at it for 10 seconds, 15 seconds, right? So you want to do a call to action, especially for a community appeal, because you want people to act. If there's no call to action, don't send an email ever, actually. So if you don't have a call to action, you shouldn't be sending an email through your email subscriber program. Different if you're emailing a volunteer and asking them to do something. Okay. So if you're using your MailChimp Constant Contact Every Action, you always want to have a call to action. It might be fundraise, volunteer, give feedback, advocate, get involved. Okay. Your call to actions should be set up, especially for your year-end campaigns, right? Your community appeals, with a button with a link to your website or whatever it's linking to. All right. If you have an image in your email, and there's a lot of back and forth about this, but I think it's helpful to link the image with the other link that if you're doing only one call to action in your email, I think it's good if the image is also linked. All right. Usually call to actions are done with a circular button. There's data on there out there about circular gets more clicks than squares. All right. So there's a lot that can go into email, but ultimately you want to make sure that you have a call to action. What are example call to actions? These: make a gift, donate here, make a donation, right? And it's typically a circular button, and it could be after the message that you've written, right? About the impact that you made for the year, what you plan to do in 2023, right? Your entire board signs it, potentially with their names. Yeah, it might be different now. Well, yeah, you've never seen, so they're oval. They're not, so circular is like they're oval corners, not circles. So I should say maybe ovular, rounded edges. That's what it was. Mary, thank you, Mary. Rounded edges. Rounded edges get, you can read through the MNR. They have thousands of pages about email. So these are some helpful call to actions for fundraising. They're really short. Okay, so that's everything with email. We're going to do timelines in a moment, though you'll notice some of the timelines, the timeline already started, but you could make some adjustments. Okay, so direct mail, things to be thinking about with direct mail. All right, so some reminders. First and foremost, you want to make sure that you're not overwhelming yourself and mailing to everyone. So segmentations are probably pretty important. And in grassroots organizations, the way that I've done segmentations is I literally will pull the data from the donor platform, right? And then if you only have, 500 donors, I might pull the whole list and then go through with my board or with my committee and say, who should get a direct mail? Who should get a letter in the mail? Who should get a phone call? Who should get an email? If you're planning your year-end campaign right now, that might be worth doing, pulling not, and this is so there's one organization here who has 110,000 people in their donor database. You're not going to be able to do that. If you have 500, 400, right? You might be able to do this with a group of people, pull everyone and start to think who should get a phone call, who should get a direct mail, who should get an email for our end of the year community appeal. All right. If you're planning a community appeal at the end of the year, which I hope you are. Okay. So other things to be thinking about for direct mail, you want to be clear about the problem that your organization is solving and the urgency to solve the problem. All right. It's important to segment your mailing list. If you're working with a donor right now who might be contributing a personally significant gift, you want to make sure that they're not getting a direct mail, because then they're going to think, why am I getting this when I'm already having a conversation about making a donation? So you really do want to put some strategy and segmentation into who gets what type of communication. All right. It's always good to do a PS. So sometimes that's why these direct mail campaigns are done with groups, or you hand 10 letters to a board member and say, who do you know? You write the PS, right? Because they're writing it to people they know, because people give to people when people ask people that they know, right? So the peer-to-peer, it's the oldest form of fundraising. Other things to be thinking about are using a real stamp. It costs more, but people don't think it's spam when they get a real stamp. And then mail takes a long time. So 2 weeks, assume 2 weeks. It's November 4th right now. So if you're doing, your community appeal to land near Thanksgiving or end of the year, you have to, back up the 2 weeks and plan for that as well, if you want your donations to come in before the end of the year. All right. So questions, please feel free to ask away. All right. So in terms of a letter length, there's a lot of data out there about 2-page letters versus 1-page letters. Okay. So somebody who hasn't given in a really long time, they might need more communication to give. Okay. So a donor who hasn't given in a while, or a prospect who's never given, but somebody gave them your name and said, I think they'll give. So you got their name, or maybe they volunteered once, right? And that's how they're on their list. They should get that longer letter, maybe the 2-page letter. And then somebody who's given in the past 12 months, maybe they should get a shorter letter. Okay. So things to be 1 page. All right. So 1 full page. All right. What to include in the letter. All right. Personalization, their name. That's really important. You want to do an emotional appeal, and you want to make the letter relatable, and you want to get to the point, right? And you want to ask for an amount. So you want to do an amount that makes sense for your organization. So an organization with 110,000 donors in their email database, they might ask for levels that are 250, 500, and 1,000. When I used to work in grassroots organizations, and we only brought in 75,000 or 100,000 a year, these were the levels we were doing: $25, $10, $50, $100, right? And your buck slip, you also, ideally, you have a return envelope if you can afford it, a return envelope with a stamp. Not every organization does a stamp, but most organizations do a return envelope with it addressed to your organization. Okay. Also, sometimes people ask about fund names. I think fund names are irrelevant. You want a donation, right? Like, that's the ultimate goal, is the donation. All right. Questions, ask away. So this is a sample timeline. All right. Now this might be really squished. I tried to do it for today's date. All right. But this is going to make you busy, because it's basically, you need to start tomorrow or today, whether it's an email or a direct mail, right? You need to start drafting the email. Ultimately, you need to start creating the copy, right? And then you need to, so I can give you sample language, but I tried not to do that because, like, you want these to be really personal to your organization. All right. And so, like, if I give you, I will add in a sample end of year appeal language into the box link. And I also think it's important that you all make these personal to your organization. All right. In terms of photos, so if you're doing, I've done that sometimes for small grassroots organizations, right? In larger organizations, you tend to not see that. You tend to see black and white letters only, right? That tends to be what they do on letterhead. For smaller grassroots organizations, sometimes you see photos, maybe on the second page, all right, in color, maybe, or black and white. I think it depends on your organization, and it depends on the photo, right? If it's a photo of your program, or if it's a photo of an area that you recently restored, or I can't remember who had that bench that they just made, right? Somebody had, right? Man, that could go in there, right? So, it depends what the photo is, I think. All right. And, ultimately what you're trying to do is to get the donation, right? So you don't want to distract too much from what you're trying to do. Okay. And I can also add, I do want to be clear though, when you copy and paste other people's language for appeals, it seems like it's not authentic to your audience, and you want to be authentic to your volunteers and to your audience because they know who you are, right? And so you want to make sure that the language you use appeals to your community. All right. So sample timeline, right? You know, in October was when you were developing the story and segmenting your list and maybe writing the letter and developing anything digital. So this is both for email and direct mail. So it's compressed a little bit. You could still get this out. You would just really need to focus in the next few weeks. You can do this, right? You can definitely make it happen. Okay. It might just need to make it happen all now in November. All right. And they might not get out until, you know, they might not land with email. It's immediate. The direct mail, it might not land in people's mailbox until mid-December. All right. So typically, sometimes what happens is after the direct mail lands in somebody's mailbox in December, that's when you pick up the phone and you do your phone banking and you say, Leah, I just wanted to make sure that you got our letter in the mail asking for our year-end appeal and asking to see if you would donate $25. And I think that's where segmentation is even more important, right? You segment out who gets a phone call, right? Who gets an email after the direct mail, right? Things to be thinking about, okay? And then, so in December, you're following up, and then in January, there's still work to do, okay? So you can tweak this timeline, absolutely, all right? So you want to be thinking about what's the follow-up that we do after we did our appeal, right? We want to thank donors. We want to acknowledge. We also want to think about what worked. What was our success? What do we want to do different next time, right? Analyzing what you did so that you can do it better in the future is really important. So yes, phone calls. So in the last session, we talked about phone banking. If you could phone banking is just picking up the phone and calling people. If you can commit to maybe calling 20, you don't have to call that many people, but if you could get a few volunteers, right, to maybe each commit to calling 5 to 10 folks after the direct mail lands, I think that could be really helpful. Even better is if your volunteers and board members all live, Perla, if you can translate that for me, if your volunteers and board members and fundraising committee members all live near each other, you can bring people together to do this phone banking, maybe in different rooms in a building or a house, and it makes it more fun. Oh gosh, subject lines of emails. So I think subject line in emails is like is almost a 2-hour conversation, but I think that, so if you do donate now, so if there's certain phrases and subject lines that you can get marked spam in people's inboxes. So sometimes you want to make the language connect to your organization. All right. So, something highlighting impact and using phrases that your organization uses, right? So years ago, when I worked for a grassroots organization, we used to do a thank you circle at the end of the year. And so when we would do appeals, we would somehow try to incorporate our thank you circle in the appeal in a way where it'd be like fund more thank you circle. So it wasn't just donate now. So it was language that people recognized and knew that they were supporting it for the future. So the idea behind phone banking, and this was in last, and then we need to head into a breakout room. The idea behind phone banking is that you're calling people when they're going to pick up the phone. So you want to be thinking about, and we listed this in another slide, the best time to call people is who your audience is. So this is why you segment phone calls, because I see questions coming in. So you segment so the right people get the phone call. Okay. So people who you're calling, they should be expecting your phone call. So in another session, we talked about, you get a yes from a donor because you've been cultivating them and you've been stewarding them, and they know they're gonna call you. They know that they're gonna get a phone call from Leah on December 10th because they're prepared for it, because Leah has been talking with them about what's going to happen in 2023. Leah's been talking about how we're trying to raise $100,000 to fund this. And so they're prepared for it because they've been getting the messaging. All right. And so you segment because you want to make sure that the right people are getting a phone call and they're going to make the donation before the year's end. And that's why you segment. And that's why you only call certain folks that you know, right? Folks that you've been cultivating and working towards getting the yes. All right, so this is our sign that we're going into a breakout room, all right? And what are we gonna talk about in our breakout room? We are gonna talk about how have you done community appeals in the past? What strategies seem relevant to you? How could this be incorporated into your fundraising plan for 2023 and 2022? All right, so I realize you have 2 months left for a community appeal. So you got to start working on it now. So what can you do, right? Feasibly do, and then how can you plan for the future? Because ideally you're all creating your fundraising plans for 2023. So you can really do this next year even better. And some things you can do now. All right. And then reflect on your resources. What could you commit to doing in 2023, 2022, knowing there are just a few weeks? And then really, what can you do in 2023? Any questions before we go into breakout rooms? Some people are going to stay in the main room. Aurora, do you want to give, I can't remember what we say before we go into breakout room about the main room.
Yeah, if you're listening on the Spanish channel, please stay in the main room. And if you don't get an indication that you're supposed to leave, don't leave, stay in the main room.
All right. We're heading into breakout rooms.
All right, it looks like this might be our group here in the main room. If you are participating in the breakout conversation, would you make some kind of indication, like flash a emoji at us or put yourself on camera just so we know who's here?
I need tech support. Okay. I don't think I should be.
Hi, Corinne.
Hi, I'm thinking so the main group is the Spanish, correct?
Yeah, it's English and Spanish, but because we're in the
Okay.
main room, if you've selected a language channel, we'll have the interpreters interpret for us.
Okay, so I think I'm where I belong.
Yeah. Well, does anyone feel inspired to start talking about their own situation? What kind of appeals have you done, if any?
I haven't done any, so I'm going to be flying solo, and I'll be working on a letter. I'm also at the same time working with recruits for a board for next year. So that's why I'm going to be flying solo. So all of this is so important that I know what I'm doing this weekend is listening to every session that I miss, which is 2. But I find what you're sharing valuable. And thank you.
What is the plan for this year?
Well, everybody or me?
Why don't you start?
Okay.
I think everyone can join, but I'm curious about yours.
Okay. All right. So I've never done this before. I've always gone with what I get working with the city and Cal and Rose Foundation and other organizations. So this is totally, I'm in waters I've never traveled in before. So just from what I heard today, I really need to work on who are the people who know about our group that I can connect with and appeal. And then to break them into those who know us and those who don't, that I may obviously be doing like a cold call, but in the form of a letter introducing our project. We do have on our website that format when people go into Moving South Berkeley Forward that has donation, donor, volunteer, that kind of a thing. But we haven't had lack of exposure. So we haven't had that response where people are going, oh, it's that time of the year and Moving South Berkeley is doing a great job. Let me click and make a donation. So gonna have to play with that so people will be enticed to do that, because we do have that format on our site. But it's the letter writing that I need to do to engage people, as I said, who either know about us or that are doing similar work and would be interested in supporting us.
Mhm.
So that's where I am.
Exciting.
And I'd love to hear from somebody what they do, because I'm flying solo.
I can share if you'd like.
Yes.
My name's Sue and I'm with the School Garden Network, and we're a very small organization. And we started doing a direct mailing 2 years ago. It was our first time we ever did that. And I was very surprised with how successful it was for what our expectation was. So we were able to bring in like about like $12,000 to $15,000, $10,000 to $15,000 at the end of the year, which exceeded our expectations by a lot. And so that was amazing. And I feel like ever since then, I'm just committed to getting a direct mailing out at least once a year. We try to do it twice. We try to do one in the spring and then one at the end of the year. But it's hard, you know, to get it all done. And it's expensive because we have to pay for all the, you know, the printed picture, letter. We putting program highlights together that's in color, getting the remit envelope, and then the envelope to stuff it all in. We're finding that handwriting the return address helps too, than just putting the stamp on it of like the printed sticker. So that's more time also to do. But people, including myself, when I check my mail, if I don't know, you know, if it's a handwritten and I don't know exactly who it's from, I'm more tempted to open it, not knowing if it is a solicitation, to be honest, you know. And so that I think is helping. And then we do like an email campaign also, and we always have a donate button. But we tend to get smaller amounts donated online, and then we get bigger checks in the mail, which I was like shocked about. And so I think the woman that just spoke, you should do it. And I think it's helpful. I think it's old school, and I think people resonate with that, especially like old school people, for sure. I think the challenge for me right now is figuring out what to say in the letter, because I have like a draft I've already started, and there's like a few revisions, and a lot of people are putting their input. But there is feedback that it needs to be much simpler and easier to read. And I really appreciated, if her name's Leah, sorry, this is my first session. I wish I had come to them previously, but just like simple language, I think is really important. And I think, you know, speaking one way to people who have already given, because they already know about us, and then the people who haven't, kind of maybe giving them the bigger letter with more of like the why and like how this really impacts people, because every other people who have given kind of know us already. And so that's going to help me kind of take this letter to the next level. But then also, just to be completely honest, like we're having we're like in some financial, trouble right now, just because we've lost some funding, and it's like a really been challenging to come out of COVID and like fully launch. And so I don't know if like we want to tell people really how much how much we need their help financially, and that we like are nervous about that, or if like we don't want to sound desperate and we want to just really focus on like why, like what the work we're doing. And so some people in our organization think that we should just be really direct and be like, we are in financial struggles and we need your help today. And other people were just like, don't sound desperate, and so I don't really know how to finalize the content of this and like what to like share, so I would be really open to hearing some advice.
Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you. Edwin or Corinne, any thoughts about what Sue should do?
Wow. You
Ya,
know,
sí,
yeah, go
bueno,
ahead.
gracias por tu experiencia muy bonita. Yo sí estoy de acuerdo contigo en el momento que tú mencionas que debes enfocarte en el por qué, más que en solicitar la donación. Y yo creo que en la despedida deberíamos, mi consejo sería enfocado en que sea parte de tu organización, ¿no? Como que trabajamos juntos, somos un equipo, esperamos obtener los resultados, o sea, como una manera de involucrarlo a tu porqué, ¿no? A tu objetivo.
Mm.
Thank you.
Yeah, that makes sense. They're part of it. They're bought in. Yeah, I don't know. I wonder if there's a way to say it without it sounding like, like we are desperate for this money, but also still expressing the importance and the urgency of this moment, right? You can talk about how the pandemic was a serious challenge for the organization. And you need their support now more than ever as you are doing X to get out of it, and to move past it. But like trying to keep it in sort of a positive direction as you're expressing that it's important. I guess that would be my suggestion.
Thank you. That makes sense. Mhm.
Yeah, I don't think you should leave out the fact that we've all had to pivot. Oops. And, that's just the reality of where we're going. I work with Berkeley High students. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to the Parent Center and they're having the same issues at the school. So acknowledging that what we've come through and that you're still fighting to make that difference lets them know, yeah, you've been somewhat overwhelmed, but you're not giving up the fight. And they're important in helping you achieve that goal.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Great. Actually, that's a great comment. And the question that the comment elicited was, we really need, we're not in dire straits, but we really do have some goals that we have to achieve. And so how do we make that clear, right?
Yeah.
Without sounding too many alarms, but also getting the donations that we need. So great suggestion. If anyone had any aha moments or thoughts or things that they're going to commit to, feel free to share that in the Zoom group chat. All right. And you have enough time to do some tweaks and adjustments in 2022. All right. And then hopefully you can calendar out and plan out for your 2023 Another thing to think about, because in the small breakout room, somebody mentioned, how do we let folks know that we really do need to raise this money, that we did lose money during COVID. And sometimes what you can do is you can approach a smaller set of donors, maybe donors who have the capacity to give in a more, at a higher level, and talk with them one-on-one about that and say, this is our plan, this is what we want to do, this is how we see you fitting into it. And you're more transparent with them than you are with the 1,000 people that you're emailing or the 1,500 people that you're sending a letter to. So that can also be helpful as well. So some great ideas in the chat. Okay, we are going to take our 5-minute break. It is 2:03. We will resume at 2. I'm going to give you an extra minute. So we'll resume at 1:09, 2:09, 3:09, 4:09, wherever it is. In here, 5 minutes. I will stay right here and answer questions that people have. But if you need your 5-minute break, you can take it.
Yeah, I was going to, my comment to you, Leah, is because I really don't have a donor list. I don't. I've already said that. My strategy was to approach individuals that I know that I have shared what I've been doing or the project's been doing for the past 2 years. And I feel pretty competent. I don't know how much I would get out of these 4 or 5 individuals, but for me, that would be what I see as my strategy, just considering the amount of time that I have left. And then still working on a letter that could be a follow-up in January that says to a group of people that I have on an email list, which is tiny, right? But asking for a donation before tax, before you do your tax thing. I don't know how good that idea is, or if it's even realistic, contacting these 10 other groups of folks that I've interacted with. Some are businesses, some are organizations that I know they've got a pretty good list and we've done things together that I could send out a short, and I don't know what that would look like is where I'm going with that. And I know you've mentioned like keeping letters short, be direct, make it personal, all of those things. I take in my toolbox.
Yeah, so these are the things that I think you could do. So I'm just gonna write this in the chat. So the structure of the letter, would be like, I already said, so like what you do, right? 2 is impact from this year and what you are asking, right? Like the donation. And ideally, right, each is a paragraph in an ideal world, right?
Okay. Yeah.
What is it that you do, right? And you share that in a paragraph. And you want the language to be personal. So, you don't want to copy and paste your mission and vision, because that is, that is organizational information that sometimes isn't personal. So if you did a program this year, that was impact from this year, right? And if there were community members at it and organizations at it, and you had X number of people that attended, right? That's what you did. That was the impact from this year. Now, the impact from this year can get very long, very quickly, right? So I would say if this is the first time you're doing this, just start with a page. Start with a page. Don't overwhelm yourself, right? After the first year, you can tweak it, right? That's when you can do somebody else. So the more personal you are when it comes to a direct mail, because you open mail that has a stamp, that
Mhm.
is addressed, that has, pen, not just printed out, right? So the return address is handwritten, the to the sender is handwritten. You're just more likely to open that. So
Okay.
think about what you can do. And if it's only 15 letters, that's what it is, and that's fine. And every organization starts somewhere, right?
Okay.
Every organization that started with the 10 to 15 people that we know. Every organization started that way. Even the biggest organizations started that way. All right. So, and then eventually you'll grow your list with those other strategies, and you don't have to worry about them right now. Like, you don't have to. And I heard January, so I want to make sure you're going to send your letter out before January.
Yes, I
Okay.
didn't mean to say
Okay.
that.
Because everybody's accustomed to being asked for a donation before the end of the year.
Okay.
So if you don't ask your people, they're being asked by somebody else. Everybody is used to being asked for donations, right? And so it's really important that you do your asking. Really, really important.
And November, say late November or middle November, with that letter, and start working on the draft for the one page right now, right? Or yesterday. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you get your letters out, and I don't know where they're going. So if they're just staying in California only, because I know mostly, then as long as you get your letters out by like December 5th,
Okay. Or
right?
before.
Or
Okay.
before, because that's too, you might want
Competition.
December 1st, if you can do
Okay.
it. I mean,
Okay.
if it's a stamp in the mail, it's not going to take 2 weeks,
Mhm.
but it might take longer than you think.
Right.
And if you want to do a follow-up phone call, then you have to budget that in.
Right.
And if
Yes.
you aren't volunteering or working on Christmas, you have to think about that, right?
Yeah.
So all these things. All right.
Yeah.
I think there was a question. Oh, that was it. Okay, got it. All right. Okay, so coming back from break, any questions? Feel free to ask away. This is your time. All right. So peer-to-peer fundraising. So peer-to-peer fundraising, it's the oldest form of fundraising. It's everything that we've been talking about, right? It's community appeals. It's you asking your colleagues and friends for donations. And now there's platforms to do it on. Okay. So, before Facebook existed, peer-to-peer fundraising was just you asking friends and colleagues and donors for money. And now it's this whole thing where you use a platform to ask for donations, and maybe your state or your county or your city or your community foundation has a day of giving. Okay. And if you've participated in those day of givings, share that in the Zoom group chat, share the successes that you've had, right? So that's often where the peer-to-peer fundraising comes in. Maybe volunteers will share your Giving Tuesday link or that state giving day. All right. And sometimes it means that if you're doing that, there's other things that you want to be thinking about in preparation for those days, right? If somebody's going to your website, you want to make sure your website works, right? If somebody's going to your website to make a donation, you want to make sure the donation link works. So you test it the day before and you make sure that you can do a $1 donation and you see it go through, and then you know it works. Another thing, and it's not on this slide, but it's not even on this deck at all, but you always want to, especially around the time when people are making donations, and if they're making them online, see how many clicks it takes to get through the donation process. Is there, if somebody's coming to your website straight through a donate link, they're there. And they don't have to figure out how to get to the donate. But if somebody is just going onto your website, is the donate now button clear? Like, could you do a pop-up the entire month of December, donate now? Or maybe for a week or a few days, right? Okay, that's not on the slides. That was a separate aside. All right, so the basics. So things to be thinking about for peer-to-peer, because we hear about this all the time and maybe we get, oh, should we be doing the Giving Tuesday or the Giving Day? And so you can do it if you have the capacity to do it, is what I say, right? So if it only works if you have people to help you with it, right? And I know just from conversations, there's a spectrum. Some of you have a lot of volunteers, some of you don't. So if you have a lot of alum or past participants or program participants or volunteers, this works because the power of peer-to-peer is a lot of people asking for donations on your behalf through their networks, all right, on their social media, okay? So it's basically just volunteers, your community, sharing a link on their social media to raise money through their own networks. And it's people that you don't know, right, that they're reaching. So if you have a volunteer and the person has 1,000 Facebook friends, you don't necessarily know all their Facebook friends, right? It's also when people raise money. And if you don't want to do the Giving Tuesday, that's fine. Another way to think about this is sometimes individuals raise money on their birthday or life cycle events on behalf of an organization. Okay, so maybe that might be something to put into your fundraising plan, right? Teaching and sharing people about that. That's a form of a community appeal as well. And it's people appealing to the community that you don't even know, which broadens your community, right? And so ultimately, peer-to-peer is volunteers or anybody that's not you, somebody else, right? Reaching out to their networks to raise funds for your organization. And you have to support volunteers with resources to do it because they won't know what to do if you don't tell them how to do it. So ultimately, it's a method to raise money in a way that actually can be meaningful to the volunteers. I'll also give you some alternatives. If your volunteers are not into that, I will give you an alternative. It taps into the volunteers network. It can increase their affinity. Affinity means connection to your organization. Because what happens is they share it, then some person that they're connected to says, oh, what's that organization that you mentioned, right? So they're organically talking about your organization, which increases their connection to it because they're talking about it in different ways. And it also introduces your organization to new people and helps you achieve your fundraising goals. So we're not doing that poll. So when I used to volunteer with an organization, it was a grassroots organization. And one of the things that they did really well, they never did the end of the year campaign, but they did birthdays. They always asked for alumni, and this wasn't a school, it was just a program that people went through, a community program. They always asked for alumni to raise money for the organization on their birthday. And they would create a link and they would say, and they would create the copy and they would, the staff, and it wasn't a large staff, the staff would create the copy, would create the link and the image, and they would give it to volunteers. And every single time they talked to volunteers, they would say, would you be willing to raise money for our organization on your birthday, right? And so it takes time to build this in to your fundraising method and to ask your volunteers to do this. Okay, so it does take time. So other examples, all right. So, peer-to-peer examples, I've talked about the fundraiser. If you're on Facebook, you see this on Facebook, okay? There's another platform. I don't know what that's going to look like on that Giving Tuesday. I think who knows? But there's also Giving Tuesday, right? And we see a lot of ask on Giving Tuesday on Facebook, okay? There's other ways to do peer-to-peer, right? For life cycle events and for memorial events and tribute events, okay? So these are things to be thinking about. So to prepare, right, you want to make sure, because it's often done via social media. So you want to make sure that you've updated your social media account, maybe in the last month or two, right? So if you look at your social media and you haven't posted in 2 years, go post something before you do this. So it looks like you're active, all right? Make sure you can log into the page, okay? And then, you know, things that you need to prepare for your volunteers is they need to have your handles. The worst thing is when somebody does a link and tags the wrong organization, because maybe you have a similar name. So make sure they have your correct handle, all right? And links that you want them to share, text that you have approved and created. So sometimes this might mean creating a 1-page document with everything that a volunteer would need to raise money on behalf of your organization. And you don't even need to use like you could get away from using a peer-to-peer platform. Like you could just ask everybody on a certain day to share a donate link on their social media if you want to just do this easier for you. Okay, there's different methods. All right, if you do this through Facebook's platform, you don't always know the donors because they donate through the Facebook platform, so you don't actually get all the information. So there's, you know, different ways of doing this. All right, so you want to make sure that your social media is up to date in whatever platform you use. All right, and then think about where is your audience, right? Are your volunteers on these platforms, right? If they're not, then it might not be the best thing to do. I will say, depending on people's age, another good one could be text message, right? Literally asking people to, now you can't do mass text messages, but you could ask a volunteer to text a few people with a link. You can't do mass text messaging. You have to use like a platform for that. So, which is a separate training. Sorry, it is a separate training. All right, so thinking about your volunteer toolkit, this is what you want, right? So a schedule of what to do that explains, you know, this is what and when to post, right? A website link, approved photos, all right? And maybe an FAQ sheet with answers to common questions, right? You want this all in one document, okay, that you share with your volunteers, all right? So that you can make sure they're doing the right thing. So there are platforms out there, okay? And some of them have helpful features. So again, you could do this no platform, right? The easiest is post the link on Facebook with your website /donate. That's the simplest way to go about it. All right. And then there's all these, because everything's already set up, right? And then there's all these other platforms that you might hear about. Okay. And so sometimes we can get persuaded to do that because we hear about it. But I do want to be very clear that these take time to set up. All right. Yeah. So someone just shared in the chat, you have to have a lot of volunteers to make this work. All right. So some of your organizations might have a lot of volunteers that, and you know, 300, 400, 500, 1,000, or a big alumni network, and it might work, right? But if you don't have a lot of volunteers, this is not the method to choose. Okay, focus on direct mail. But these are some of the platforms that you might see, all right, that do these, you know, that can help you with your peer-to-peer. All of these do this. Oh, Amanda's sharing that Facebook works if we share to a lot of community pages. So if you share information about a campaign that you're doing on other people's pages. Is that what I'm reading? Amanda?
Yeah, so we post on our main page, but
Mhm.
then we share our post to as many community pages that's relevant, and that's where we get all of our action. Even though we have a lot of followers,
Mhm.
it's all about spreading it out to those community pages, because then there are people in there that aren't on our page. They haven't liked our page yet or something. And then, of course, they are drawn to our page and like us. So it just continues to build.
Another great example. So there you go. Okay, so one thing to think about is, and if one of you all can share what you mean, and maybe people understand this, but community pages that would be relevant. Okay, so I think that's important for people to understand as well. So relevant local pages. So not another organization that's, relevant local pages. Okay. Good idea. Now, there's other examples. So maybe you don't like social media at all, and that's fine. So one other thing to be thinking about when it comes to community appeals is if people in your organization have life cycle events, which we all do, right? Birthday, all of these life cycle events. And something to think about is creating an option where people can contribute in a life cycle event to your organization. So years ago, when I ran the very small grassroots organization and our annual budget was 75,000, we had a lot of youth that would volunteer. And one of the kids had a life cycle event, okay, and decided that for his life cycle event, he was going to raise funds for the organization, all right, and have people come out and volunteer. And then he created this model of, how people could contribute to the organization through a life cycle event, shared it with his friends, and for several years after, other people did it. Right. So there's other ways of doing peer-to-peer. There's other ways of community appeals. And you want to be thinking about, how could other folks in different age, because this child was 13, so, didn't have their own money, right? But chose to use this life cycle event where they volunteered to raise money for the organization. So also thinking about those types of structures as well can be helpful. Maybe something to plan for 2023 potentially. So, some action steps. I think it can be helpful to, assess which examples might be relevant, right? And, don't do what doesn't work for you. So some people shared that sharing on other people's pages works. Don't do the same thing thinking that don't do the same thing over and over thinking you're going to get better results if you didn't change the strategy, because it probably won't work again, right? And determine if you have the capacity for the platform or not, and set some goals for yourself, right? Set $500 on Giving Tuesday, or, whatever it is, okay? 1,000, 5,000, right? So other things to be thinking about when you're preparing for a campaign, and again, it depends on the type of campaign, right? They all require sort of different preparation, right? So you need to have some sort of cohesion around what it is you're doing. What's the idea, right? Is it direct mail, right? The program, right? Are you doing direct mail? Are you going to do email? Are you going to do social media? What's the basic idea, right? And what's the theme? And you don't always need to have a theme, but if it's end of the year, that's what it is. If it's we're trying to raise $250,000, that's your theme. That, it can be very basic, but creating a campaign theme and goal can help people understand the why. sometimes you need ample volunteers, right? Sometimes you need volunteers to support other volunteers in a base. If you're using your volunteers to do a phone-a-thon, right? And also thinking about who you're reaching out to, who's your dedicated community, your donors, right? Your email list, all of those folks. If you have social media accounts that you're going to use, you need to get those ready. And then if your volunteers are going to help, they have to be comfortable with the technology if you're using that, right? And they have to be comfortable asking for donations, okay? So we did, I can't remember, but we wrote and practiced scripts. This is when you use your scripts, okay? The scripts that you worked on last session or 2 sessions ago, you need to use them in December. Your volunteers need to use them in December, all right? So incredibly important. And I think that even if you don't have a lot of time, I think that, even using those scripts and picking up the phone could help you get towards that goal for your year-end campaign. So this is what it might look like if you have volunteers helping with you, right? And it can take a lot of time sometimes with volunteers because they have day jobs and they have families. And you have to sort of work backwards, right? If the date of your campaign is, December 15th, these are all the things that you might need to do before then, right? Recruiting volunteers, right? Telling them how to post the link, right? Telling them how to make the phone call, pulling together the resources, the fundraising page, testing the campaign. That's, making sure your links work, right? Sometimes it can be helpful to do a soft launch to get a sense of how this is going to go. So sometimes, let's say you launch your year-end campaign when the literary magazine, they always would launch their campaign November 15th. I know we're getting close to these dates, so it's hard, but they would launch their campaign November 15th and November 1st, and between November 1st and November 15th, they always tried to hit a percentage of their goal so that they knew what they had to reach between November 15th to December 30th or 31st. So things to be thinking about, right? Like, what does this timeline, and I didn't give you a date. I just said, these are all the things that you have to think about, right? And then you might need to put in, okay, if I have to train somebody, how long might that take? If people need to do this work and give input and we have to create the copy, how long that might take. I gave you other sample timelines, right? Also thinking about approvals as well. So I give various timelines because, you might be doing different things and people might have different availabilities. All right. So, if you're going to do a peer-to-peer, it might take, if you're going to do video, right? It might take you 6 weeks, but maybe less if no video, right? And all of these elements, right? They form a theme and they form your ask, okay? So your images, if you do video or not, you don't need it. The copy, right? The link, okay? And sometimes testing those things out takes a long time, right? Longer than we think sometimes, okay? So it's just important to be thinking about what works for you, right? Maybe it is direct mail. Maybe it's phone banking, right? And maybe that's what you do in 2022, and that's okay, right? Because we really do have to, you can't do everything. You have to start somewhere and then reflect back and think, what should we do next year and what worked and what do we want to try? And you don't want to overwhelm yourself or your volunteers, because I know lots of people are at capacity. All right. So reflection on some things, all right, things to be thinking about in terms of how to implement all these strategies. So over the course of these 4 sessions, right, we talked about managing volunteers and we talked about recruiting volunteers and we talked about direct mail and email and peer-to-peer and how to make the ask and the structure of an ask, okay? So as you're thinking about next year and your fundraising plans for 2023, it might be helpful to prioritize what you think is most important, right? In achieving your goals, right? Is it that you need more volunteers to do all of this, right? Is it that you need to maybe do an event to recruit volunteers or do a pop-up event because you're missing opportunities? Or is it getting people on the phone and just calling your donors because you haven't done that in so long? Or is it thinking about how you're going to build your donor list, right? And so I think it can be helpful, and everybody has access to all 4 slides. So I think it can be helpful to think about, you know, of all the things that we did learn, what is most important and what can we do right now? All right, because you can't do everything. So you've got to sort of think about, what do you have the capacity to do in this moment, knowing that you're going to strive to do a year-end campaign, hopefully. All right. So other things to think about for implementing some new ideas is decide what's relevant and aligns with your capacity. I do think it's important to discuss with your leadership team, so your committees, right? Your board, okay? And even volunteers who maybe show up regularly, maybe they would take an interest in some of this, right? It's how you build your leadership pipeline. If you can plan your 2023 year while simultaneously trying to do your direct mail or email campaign, I think that's amazing. Also, don't try everything all at once. It's too much, okay? So that's the idea of prioritizing. If you try to do everything all at once, you're gonna get overwhelmed and none of it will get done well, all right? And then you want to assess what's working. So we've seen in the chat, right, that, you know, people are sharing what works for them and what doesn't work. So if something doesn't work, don't do it again. You move on, all right? Absolutely move on. And then, right, so all of these ideas and strategy take people, and people have to be committed to what you're doing. And if they're not committed to it, it's not going to get done, okay? So when you build out your 2023 plan and your fundraising plan, you really have to ask your board and your volunteers and your committees if they're committed to this work, right? Like, what do they want to take on? What will they actually complete so that you can make sure it gets done, all right? That's incredibly important. Okay, so we are going to go into one final breakout room. And this is really getting you to think about the future and your 2023 and the fundraising plan that hopefully some of you have started to tweak, adapt, build out, right? So the questions that I want you to think about are, what are your planning priorities for the next 12 to 6 months? What do you want to strive to do, right? And then how are you involving your volunteers and building a team to support the efforts? Because a lot of what we talked about, you know, today and the last 3 sessions is that it's hard to do this all alone, right? So building out a team, building out volunteers, building out a structure with committees can help you get there. All right, so we will be in our breakout rooms for 10 minutes. I would love for there to be, again, a scribe and a leader. A scribe maybe writes down aha moments after the breakout room, and the leader helps everybody get focused and make sure everybody's chatting. Breakout rooms are more fun when you're on camera because people can see you. All right, Aurora, can you say that? I forgot what you said.
If you are listening on the Spanish channel, please stay in the main breakout room. And if you don't get prompted to leave, also stay in the main breakout channel.
Okay, great. So 10 minutes, we are going to head into our breakout rooms.
We're back. Anyone want to get started with your priorities for the next 6 to 12 months?
Okay. It's me.
Be brave.
Get yeah.
Get us started. Yes, thank you.
Sure. So, I mean, what I just gleaned, and then there was so much. I'm just like, this is a Bible for me, the whole 4 series. But really working on recruiting volunteers is going to be very important to me. I had already started toying with an idea of a board, and the hook, I hope, in getting the volunteers is that the project I'm working on is about to become a concrete reality. So the city of Berkeley got money to establish a youth park. So just knowing that and being able to show a draft that's evolving of what the garden is going to look like, I hope will be a great hook. I'm also excited to know that I can go with a 1-page letter and be succinct, but really crafted well to get to the facts about what we are, what we're doing, and how important, as it was mentioned, to let the giver know the importance of their role in making this happen. You know, when this is over, I'm gonna just try to put it all in some kind of order so that when I do put it out, it's with confidence that I'll be able to address what our needs are and the role of the people who would support us. But I really also want to do, and I don't know how to go about doing it, is getting those volunteers. I'm almost thinking it's going to be easier to do an ask for donors than it will be to get volunteers. But again, I'm going back to the approval by the city, I hope is a hook that will get people into saying, this is not pie in the sky, and I'm willing to come on board. And so I guess what I have to do, and then I'm gonna hush, is when I approach individuals, find out what they're keen to do and what their strengths are, and then trying to peg them into the right slot in terms of volunteers. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I can go too if no one else is gonna go. So I guess my goals is, yeah, just engaging with those key partners and supporters to cross-pollinate our message to their audiences and to their connections. I can think of a few people already that could be great, and just kind of nurturing that a little bit more and working to get our message out in those ways. So picking up the phone probably and making the call to a few of the people that I have personal relationships with about just like really doing that and the importance of that, and making sure the timing is right. So that's a big takeaway from me. And just also on that, like the importance of picking up the phone.
Yeah.
And kind of in doing that more. So I'm going to definitely prioritize that. I agree with the last person that spoke about volunteers. We don't have a ton of volunteers right now. So, and we have in the past, but managing them and keeping them on track is so much work. And it's like a whole job in itself that we kind of, that list got small, and unless there's a very specific time and place to have somebody, we don't just have people waiting. And so creating a work plan for a volunteer around this fundraising piece, I haven't done yet. And I can see something simple and starting somewhere will be really helpful. So that is a good takeaway. And then just trying to engage my board. That's a whole series in itself. I know, but just simple
No.
things like texting the campaigns and doing things that's easy for them to, and not taking too much time from them, that can be really effective, and having those personal conversations like, I'm supporting this organization, will you too, and things like that, and just trying to re-engage the board around these like low-hanging fundraising things that kind of get swept into either staff or don't do fully. So so those are my 3 big takeaways.
That's great. Thanks, Sue.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about 2 things. One is just like, you don't have to start big with all of this stuff. Like they're all really great ideas, but like, you know, get your donation asks out to 5 people this year. That's something that would be 5 more people than last year, and you can build on it the next year. Like I think, and I think the same kind of approach to the volunteer question, because yeah, that's just, it sounds like an overwhelming task to like recruit all these volunteers and like have stuff for them to do and then coordinate them all. But like maybe the goal is like bring in 2 volunteers, right? Something that's a lot more manageable.
Ah,
Because I think that's
okay.
key, just in keeping your sanity through all of this. Like you all are already very busy, right? Like you've already got full-time jobs and more. And yeah, I think kind of keeping that perspective can help. Like just little bit by little bit is the way to think about it, approaching it. Edwin, did you have anything you wanted to share?
Sí, bueno, nosotros somos una organización que todavía no tenemos una licencia 501(c)(3). Dependemos de un fiscal sponsor. Ya como organización hemos desarrollado nuestro plan estratégico, hemos definido que para el próximo año necesitamos donaciones entre 80,000 a 100,000 dólares para poder cubrir con nuestro presupuesto financiero. Y hemos coordinado una reunión con nuestro fiscal sponsor para ver cómo nos podemos complementar de la mejor manera, porque las donaciones que recibamos van a ser a través de ellos, ¿no? Entonces, dentro de nuestro plan también vamos a conformar un board para que nos soporte específicamente en solicitar donaciones, y también vamos a formar los comités de voluntarios, ¿no? Mi pregunta era, ¿no? De acuerdo a la experiencia que se tiene para ese monto de donación que se requiere juntar, ¿cuánto es el mínimo número de voluntarios, no? Entonces, nosotros asumiendo que, por ejemplo, se le ponga como objetivo 10,000 dólares a un voluntario, entonces a priori necesitaríamos entre 8 a 10, ¿no? Entonces, eso es nosotros no tengo experiencia en ese aspecto, pero de repente nos podrían dar un pequeño feedback. El otro punto es, no hemos hecho nunca, es la primera vez que escuchamos que se solicitaban donaciones por mail y por email. También vamos a coordinar eso en la reunión con nuestros fiscal sponsor para ver cuál es la mejor manera y el medio para que las donaciones se puedan recibir a través de ellos, ¿no?
Mhm. Yeah, that sounds good, Edwin. Generally, they have some way for people to donate online, like a button. If it's not for them, I mean, if it's not for you specifically, then it's for their organization. And you can link to that in your emails and on your own website. And then often share their address as the place to send checks. But definitely confer with them about that. About the other question, I think it depends a lot on who's asking for donations and who they're asking. Like how big are the donations that you're likely to get from the people that you're soliciting? Because that's a pretty hefty number. So bigger donations are going to be necessary to get you there. or a lot more really small donations, right?
Una consulta. Nosotros, como para empezar, no tenemos muchos fondos. Nuestra estrategia que estábamos haciendo era, sabemos que nuestro fiscal sponsor realiza eventos para donaciones y que nosotros queríamos usar esos mismos eventos para que nuestra organización nos presentemos. ¿Es una buena estrategia o es mejor hacerlo también de manera independiente?
I think it probably depends on the nature of the events. It's probably a good strategy to start off, like to at least start getting your name out into the community. But it may be, depending on what you're trying to achieve, that you'll need to have your own events as well. But maybe just like as an initial step to starting to get people to know who you are and to start committing to volunteering or being part of the organization in some way, that's a good first approach, is to do it in concert with your fiscal sponsor.
All right. So as folks are coming back from their breakout rooms, feel free to share in the chat any aha moments or questions. All right, because this is your time and we are coming to a close soon. All right, so I wanted to, so if you have questions, if you have aha moments, feel free to share in the chat, because this is your time to ask them. All right, I wanted to share some reminders before, and this is, you know, this is reminders from the last 4 sessions, right? So I will say you have to do what works for you, right? So if you don't have any staff and you're one volunteer and you're giving, you know, 10 hours a week of your time, you might be doing 1/10 of what I said, right? Like you have to block out what you can actually do, right? And you have to do things that you feel comfortable with doing and that you have the time to actually do. You're not going to be able to get all of these ideas into your plan if you're just starting out. It would be impossible. And the idea is that you set goals for yourself that are manageable, that are achievable, and then you work towards continuing what you need to do. Yes, set small goals so that you can achieve them. And we talked in the first session about setting SMART goals, which is really just, if your goals are way too high, you're not gonna achieve them. Your volunteers aren't going to achieve them. Your staff isn't gonna achieve them. And then everybody just gets overwhelmed. So, you know, if this year your goal is to pick up the phone and call 5 people because you've never called 5 people, that's great. If last year you called 50 people, call 60 people, right? You have to look at don't compare yourself to any other organization. Compare yourself to your organization, to what you did last year. And if you didn't exist last year because you're a new project, then whatever you achieve is greater than last year, right? So I definitely think that perfect. Going for 2 volunteers, that's what you need, right? So other things and every organization is different, right? Some of you do have more resources and you want to do different things, right? And so maybe building out your leadership structure is more beneficial to you because maybe you want to put volunteers on a fundraising committee because maybe your actual volunteer events are cyclical and they only happen in the summer and you have nothing to do in the fall and the winter and the spring, and you don't really have time to manage them. So maybe what they do is things on their own and they raise money and they do it on their own, right? So you have to build out a structure that works for your organization and your time. That was session 2, by the way, which you can look back at some point. So other things to also be thinking about is planning for 2023, right? So, yes, we're thinking about year-end giving. And then also if you can carve out a little bit of time to plan out for 2023, so that when it comes, you're just more prepared for your fundraising efforts. All right. So there is a link in the Zoom group chat. If folks have any questions, feel free to ask away, to hold yourself accountable, right? Maybe share in the Zoom group chat one thing that you're going to try to implement that you learned today, or maybe from, a conversation that you had with another group member or from one of the last 4 sessions. This is striving to hold you all accountable to the fundraising that you want to achieve. Phone calls, yay. Sue's gonna make phone calls. And a number of phone calls that you can do and achieve. All right. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 20, maybe it's 25. All right. Calendarize, yes, email appeals. And that's a great example, right? The Natural History Museum, they have 112,000 subscribers. They can calendarize their email appeals because I'm guessing they have a staff person dedicated to comms and marketing, maybe. No? Oh. So I'm so intrigued. I want to, okay, 2 FTEs and 2, got it. So somebody in there is doing okay. Other people are sharing Grow Board, Grow volunteers, so they can help do some of these things. Follow up on fundraising asks and segment donors for special types of ask. Great things that I see in the chat. So again, if you haven't yet, feel free to submit the feedback. Also, this is your time to ask questions as well. So if you have questions, you can feel free to ask any questions. This is the formal end of the training today. If I'm happy to stay online and answer any questions, and Aurora, I'm also happy to hand it over to you for some final thoughts and comments.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. It's so wonderful. I did want to encourage people to fill out the feedback survey. We read them, we use them. We'd like to see how things have gone with this particular training, and also get your feedback about possible future trainings that we could put on for grantees. So that's really valuable information for us. The links are in the chat. I think Perla is also adding links to the resources and recordings from the previous sessions. Those will be up on our website, and we'll email them out next week after we get this recording ready to go and up on the website as well. But yeah, we've got about 5 minutes left. So if anyone has questions, I'm sure Leah would be happy to respond to those. Please feel free to raise your hand or drop them in the chat.
Yes, feel free. Last time there were so many questions. So if folks have questions, feel free to ask away. You can unmute, you can type into the chat. A personal presentation to a donor, to a community member. Exciting. Oh, okay. How many weeks should you wait to ask via phone if they receive your year-end letter? So that's a great question. So if you're doing now, all right, first and foremost, you do what works for you. Okay. This is a preface. You do what works for you. And I'm going to answer the question. So if you're, I would say so if you're doing stamped mail and it's going within your state, so are you just mailing in California?
Yeah, I'm just mailing in California.
I mean, I would say assume a letter is going to take 7 business days. right? And then if it's just in the state, I would wait 10 days because it could take 6 to 7 days and then who opens their mail every day? I don't know, right? And then they open it and then they think about it. And then, so I would say like 10 days after it drops, 10 to 12 days, and segment out who gets a call. So when I used to do so one organization I worked at, and I was the only one doing the letters, so it was just me. I would only send them out to 100 people, and I would only call 10 folks. And I would choose the people who I would call the people who I knew would pick up when I called. I still have their phone numbers in my phone, right? These are volunteers from years ago. And I would call people who I knew were going to say yes, and who knew that they knew that I was going to call them, right? So, call the people that are going to pick up, that are going to donate, and have a plan to maybe ask them for the higher end of what's on the letter. Because if they don't get a call from you, they'll maybe contribute the lowest. If you've been working to cultivate them and they're going to say yes, maybe ask them on the higher end. Now, higher end being, let's say your letter says $25 to $75, right? So ask them for the 75, ask them for the 100, right? If that's the higher end. Also remember, you're writing amounts that align with your audience, not somebody else's audience, okay? So you're asking for amounts that align with your organization's budget, that align with the history of your organization in terms of fundraising. So don't compare yourself to another organization, but I would say 10 days in short.
Thank you, Leah. I also have this, it's always a little awkward, like my end of the year letter is where my very small nonprofit gets most of our major donors donate to us. And so it's like our major donor end of the year appeal, right?
Yeah.
We don't really ask for $25. It's more like, 1,000 to 2,500.
Yeah, and these were just examples, right? Because I can't, nothing, you always want to be thinking about your organization. Like, these are just literally examples, and everyone's so different. So then you want to ask on the top end when you pick up the phone.
So are the end of the year appeal letters generally just for everybody, or are they for them just their major donors? That's just a
What have
question.
you done in the past?
It's mostly just my major donors, because we have all these peer-to-peers throughout the year and other things. And then the end of the year tends to be just like
The major donors?
but I send remittance envelopes. I send a lot of letters out. But it's mostly our major donor end of the year campaign.
And how many, okay, so it's just, right, so this is a perfect example of, this is not a one size fits all, folks. If you're still in this training and you're still on the call, this isn't a one size fits all, right? Everybody does everything really differently. So, I mean, have you ever done phone calls with your year-end appeals?
Never. It's such a great idea. So I've done phone calls to people who I've asked, and I have a relationship with, like their phone numbers in my phone and all that stuff.
So if someone's gonna donate, maybe try it with the people. So every single person that you send a letter to, 100% donate.
No, God, no.
Oh, okay. So how many letters do you send out?
I usually send, let's say I think for my major end of the year letters, there's usually about 50 or so letters that I send out, and I get probably 20 donations.
That's high. That's
It's
really
pretty
good.
It's pretty good.
So maybe call the people who aren't donating, right? Like the people who haven't donated, call them, because the people are donating. And then there's the whole theory that if you call somebody and talk to them before they make a donation, they might make a bigger donation. Right? There's that too. Like if you actually talk to the donor before they make a donation and talk about their donation and talk about what you're doing. And, you know, the more you cultivate, the more you steward, the more you know what somebody is going to contribute. And you do know that they're going to contribute 2,000 and you know that their capacity is actually probably 5,000, but they're not doing that. That's when you can ask them for 3,000 or 3,500.
Yeah,
But
that's good stuff.
do what works for you. These are just ideas.
I like these ideas a lot.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you. Yes, stewardship is the key to success. Thank you all. I don't see any other questions. Thank you all so much for learning with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Leah, for guiding us all. This has been wonderful.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, take care, everyone. Good luck.
Good luck.